This meeting is being recorded.
Hello to everyone and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Tanner Swift and I'll be your moderator for this session. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Raj Anand and Sandeep Kumar. But before I hand the mic over to our presenters, I do have a few housekeeping items to cover about this presentation. Today's webinar will be recorded and made available on demand after the live session. We will provide you with some of those details at the end. Also, we'd love to hear from you during today's presentation. During the session, if you are here on WebEx with us and have any questions for our presenters, please submit those through the Q&A panel where our wonderful panelists are ready to respond. If you have any audio issues with today's session, please use the call-in number displayed on the chat screen. I will post that once again momentarily. Without further ado, I'd like to kick things off by welcoming Raj. Raj, pass the ball right over to you.
Thank you so much, Tanner. So if you could move to the next slide, please, Tanner.
Your presenter at the moment, so you should have the ability to kind of move some things around.
Okay, sorry.
You're good.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. So today's session is about scaling capabilities with Intersight programmability. So just to introduce, myself, I'm a solutions architect for data center compute division working for Cisco. With myself, we've got Sandeep, who's a customer success specialist in CX. So in today's sessions, we'll be delving into programmatic interface of Cisco Intersight. We'll be learning more how to utilize developer tools to navigate and leverage Intersight API. And we'll get to know about unlocking automations and provisioning potential. We will get to know more about understanding the Cisco Intersight API capabilities. So the agenda of this entire slide deck is to talk about Intersight architecture, talk about its API integration, to know more about developer tools, and followed up with a demo session. Without further ado, we'll start with our first topic, which is Intersight architecture. So Cisco Intersight is a cloud-based systems management platform that combines intelligent insights and automation, and a secure architecture to streamline IT operations. Its key feature includes unified management for both Cisco and third-party devices, automations and orchestrations of efficient deployment and management, AI and machine learning capabilities, and a robust security and compliance framework. Furthermore, it offers a RESTful API for integrations and customization, enhancing your ability to automate tasks and align the platform with your specific needs. The ultimate goal of Cisco Intersight is to simplify and optimize your data center operations, as we can see on the screen. So some of the key features includes unified management, automation and orchestration. Just like your Cisco Intersight includes automation features that makes it easier to manage and deploy resources across your infrastructure. It also offers orchestration capabilities through the use of workflows, allowing you to automate complex operational processes. It provides AI and machine learning capabilities. And last but not least, the security and the compliance, so that the platform is built with the secure by design approach, providing features like secure encrypted communications between managed devices and the Intersight cloud. You can move to the next slide. So as we can see that Cisco Intersight is such a powerful cloud-based system management platform designed to simplify the operations in data center and the cloud. So some of the key features that Intersight brings to the table are unified management. So Cisco Intersight provides a single holistic view of your infrastructure, allowing you to manage both Cisco and third-party hardwares, including servers, hyperconverged infrastructures, and networking devices. Automation and orchestration. With automation features, Cisco Intersight makes it easier to manage and deploy resources across your infrastructure. It also offers orchestration capabilities, enabling you to automate more complex processes and workflows. AI and machine learning. The platform leverages AI and machine learning capabilities. Security and compliance. Cisco Intersight builds secure by design approach. RESTful API. Cisco Intersight RESTful APIs allows for integration with third-party system and task automation, giving you the flexibility to customize the platform to your needs. Overall, Cisco Intersight is a comprehensive solutions aimed at simplifying data center operations by offering a cloud-based management platform equipped with management, automation, and analytics capabilities. Now we'll be talking about Intersight API capabilities. And to talk about this, we've got Sandeep. So with that, without further ado, I'll pass it over to Sandeep.
Thanks, Raj.
Thanks very
Let me
much.
make myself the presenter. Okay. Hi, everyone. So in this section, we'll be exploring the Intersight API architecture. We'll be looking at authorization schemes, which you can use with Intersight API, and other aspects related to the API. Intersight API is part of the Open Connector framework, and it was kind of implemented for inventory, alerting, security, and authentication. Everything is built in. The API uses the REST architecture to provide access to the Intersight management information model. And using the API, you can deploy, configure, manage, and monitor at scale, all from one API. Now, for SaaS environments, we have the APIs are kind of automatically updated when new features are deployed to the cloud. And Intersight provides downloadable SDK packages in multiple programming languages like for PowerShell, Python, and using the API, you can easily integrate it with third-party applications like ServiceNow or Splunk, or as a matter of fact, any other application which can leverage APIs. In terms of features, it's a RESTful API. That is, it uses the REST architecture, and it uses HTTP over TLS as the transport protocol. The Intersight API is based on the Open API specification standard, which defines a programming language agnostic interface. We do have a built-in API browser using which we can explore the API, and we will be looking at it in the demo section. We publish the Intersight Open API documents in JSON and YAML files, and it is based on the Open API schema version 3. Additionally, it provides an object-based API reference as well. Now, to access the APIs, we can use standard HTTP methods like get to query objects, post to create, patch to update objects, and finally delete to delete objects. Few quick things to note are the post and delete methods are idempotent, meaning that there is no additional effect if they are called more than once with the same input parameters. The get method is nullipotent, meaning that it can be called like 0 or more times without making any changes. The patch method may or may not be idempotent depending on the value of the content type header. So if your content type header is set to application/JSON, in that case, the patch method is idempotent. And if it is set to application/JSON-patch plus JSON, the patch method may not be idempotent in those situations. The Intersight API accepts and returns messages that are encapsulated through JSON documents. And one more thing to note is the Intersight adds a unique identifier called X*trace ID header in every single response. So when you're making API calls to Intersight, in the response, you will see X*trace ID. And the value can be used for troubleshooting purpose when opening service requests with Cisco TAC. All the physical and logical components in Intersight are represented in a hierarchical management information model, also referred to as the MIT. Each node in the tree represents a managed object and or probably a group of objects that contains its configuration and its operational state. In the Intersight API, each addressable REST resource is called a managed object. Now, every managed object has a unique identifier called MOID, which is assigned when the resource is created. Each managed object can be addressed using a URI, which includes the MOID of the managed object. And the URI can be used in any HTTP request to address the managed object. Now, for every resource, we support tagging. Tags kind of enable you to categorize your managed objects, such as by owner, environment, location. And finally, Intersight API defines an endpoint-based declarative policy model. Intersight provides various authorization options. The API keys are used to authenticate and authorize API requests sent by the client using the HTTP signature scheme. API keys are kind of the recommended option to interact with the Intersight API, and a user can generate at max 3 API keys per row. In the demo, we'll be looking at how to generate and use API keys with various developer tools. And Then we have OAuth2, which is primarily used by the Intersight mobile application, and cookies, which are used by the Intersight HTML5 GUI client running in the browser. When we interact with the Intersight API, we have to take various aspects into consideration. To start with, do we want raw or filtered responses? Now, if we want to filter data on the user end, then we can simply request all the data without any query options. But the downside is the response would be large, and which may not be desirable for bandwidth constrained environments. Another approach would be to filter the response on Intersight, which results in smaller response data and less parsing on the user end. Pagination is another aspect where, like, if the response data is more than 1,000 entries, then we have to use pagination to get the entire output. We have to use the top and skip query options to get the response in pages with max 1,000 entries per page. Now, by default, like when you're not specifying any query options and you're making an API call to Intersight, you get the top 100 objects. If you want to get the top 1,000 objects, then you can just add the query option top with a value of 1,000, and that will give you the top 1,000 objects. But if you want to go beyond 1,000 objects, that's when you have to use the top and skip query options together, and then like get the rest of the objects from the API. Search API allows users to search for multiple types of resources. And Intersight example, if you want to get inventory of a server, we can use the search API to pull the info. Without the search API, we would need to make like an individual API call to each endpoint. Example, like the server has storage controllers, DIMMs, CPUs. So to get all that information, you have to, like without the search API, you have to make individual calls to those API endpoints. With search API, you can just use a single API call, and we can get the desired information from multiple endpoints. Bulk API is another request, like another functionality where, like, if you want to create multiple objects of the same type, example, like if you want to create 10 NTP policies, then either we can make 10 separate API calls to create each NTP policy, or we can use a single bulk API call to create those 10 NTP policies. Then we have the expand query parameter, which is used to reduce the number of API calls which you need to make to Intersight API, right? As an example, if we want to pull the organization name associated with the NTP policy, then we can use the expand query parameter in a single API call to get all the information. Else, we would need to make two API calls. One would be to pull the policy, the NTP policy itself, and the second call would be to pull the organization name. And if time permits, we'll look at this in the demo as well. To prevent abuse of the APIs, the Intersight APIs are rate limited. When too many requests are received, the client may receive an HTTP status code as 429, which means too many requests. And in such situations, we need to like further tweak the code and reduce the API calls which we are making to Intersight. And from a security standpoint, consider the API keys as kind of your password to Intersight API. We need to keep the API keys secure, and they should not be shared with anyone. Now, to get started with Intersight API, we need an Intersight account, and a prerequisite to that would be a Cisco account. So if you have a Cisco account, you can just directly go to intersight.com and create your Intersight account. Once we have an Intersight account, we can generate API keys to interact with the Intersight API. We also need a UCS server. We can use the Cisco DevNet sandbox for testing if you don't have one in your environment. Finally, we need developer tools like Postman, Python to interact with the API. Now, the first step before we can start using Intersight API is to create Intersight API key. The API key has two parts. The first is the API key ID, which uniquely identifies the key. And the second part is the secret key, which is the private key only available at the API key creation. Now, the steps involved with generating these keys are, first you log into intersight.com, and then from the service dropdown, you choose the system section. When you go to system settings, at the center navigation pane, if you scroll down, you will see API keys in there. And on the far right side, you have a generate API key option. So when you click on that, it gives you a pop-up, which we see here at the center. You just need to add the description, and you can choose the schema version 2. And when you click on generate, it gives you a new pop-up with the generated API keys, and it will have two values. One is the API key ID, and the second one is the secret key. and just store these keys securely on your end. And we'll be using these keys with the developer tools based on which tool you're using. In this section, we'll be looking at how we can use various developer tools like Postman, Python, PowerShell to interact with the Intersight API. Now, Intersight GUI uses Intersight API in the background. We can use the browser developer tools to learn the API calls which the Intersight GUI uses to display the information or to create objects in the GUI. And using this, we can learn about the API endpoints and use for various tabs in the GUI. Like, for example, if I'm creating an NTP policy and I want to know like what URL to use, what data to send, I can use this method to explore that and then write my own scripts in the language of my choice and start making API calls to Intersight. Intersight has comprehensive API documentation available online. To access this documentation, you can navigate to intersight.com/API docs/API reference. This documentation allows searching for common actions and viewing details of all the specific resources. It also interacts directly with Intersight by performing API operations. Now, in this example, you can see in the screenshot, I searched for a user and expanded the user resource. I selected the get user operation from the left screen and then clicked on send. And this action kind of gets a live response from Intersight. So in this case, it displays the list of users details. You can apply multiple query parameters as well to filter the responses. And we'll be looking at this in the demo as well. This is interacting with your Intersight platform live. So just make sure that if it is your production environment, then whatever operations you're doing here, be careful with those operations. Now, for Postman users, we have Intersight Postman collection available on the provided link. All we have to do is import the Postman collection, which includes the pre-request script, which takes care of the signing of HTTP requests which are being sent to Intersight. And all we have to do is add the API key and secret key as environment variables in Postman and start making API calls. And we can also generate other programming language code using Postman. And finally, we do have Cisco DevNet Learning Labs for step-by-step details around how you can use Intersight API using Postman. And we'll be looking at this in the demo section. To get started with Python, again, we need Intersight API keys for authorization. If you want to use the Python SDK, then all you have to do is install the Python library Intersight. So you can just say pip install Intersight, and that will install the Python SDK for you, and you can start leveraging that. If you want to use the request library, then you need an authentication helper function to authenticate or to sign your HTTP request to Intersight. And for that, we do have a Intersight-auth library created by someone from Cisco side, which you can leverage with your request calls. And then we do have Cisco DevNet Learning Labs for step-by-step details on the provided link. To get started with Ansible, again, we need the Intersight API keys for authorization. You need Ansible 2.9 or higher version installed on your computer. The next step is we want to install the Ansible collection using the command ansible-galaxy collection install cisco.intersight. And all you need is update the inventory file with the API key ID and secret key variables. And then either you can use the sample playbooks which are provided with the collection, or you can create your own custom playbooks to start making API calls to Intersight. And then we do have a lab guide for further testing, and we'll be looking at this in the demo as well. To get started with Terraform, the first step is to, again, generate Intersight API keys. You can reuse the same key for multiple platforms. You don't have to generate n number of keys. All you need is one API key pair, right? Once we have the keys, we can create the Terraform configuration. In the screenshot at the top, we can see the Terraform block where we specify the Intersight provider. Then we are passing the provider specific information in the provider block at the center, where we are entering the Intersight URL, the API key, and the secret key. And then finally, at the bottom, we are defining a NTP resource with the needed configuration, like the name, description, enabled NTP servers, and all that stuff. Now, once the configuration is ready, we can run the Terraform init, plan, and apply commands to create the resource in Intersight. Now, for complete documentation, please refer to the provided documentation, which is available under registry.terraform.io on this link. For PowerShell users, the first prerequisite is you want PowerShell 7.3.3 or higher version. Once we have the PowerShell 7 installed, we can get the Intersight API keys and configure the Intersight PowerShell SDK connection. We can pass the details like the Intersight path, the API key, the secret key to set Intersight configuration commandlet, which kind of configures your Intersight connection. And then once the connection is ready, you can start making API calls. So in this case, we are sending get-intersight organization commandlet, and we are getting the organization related information back from Intersight. And we will be looking at this in the demo as well. Now, to explore parameters needed by the commandlet, you can use the get help commandlet, and to find commandlets with a specific keyword, in this case, we are searching for SSH. You can use the get commandlet, which are available with PowerShell. And the source code and the documentation is available under GitHub, Cisco DevNet, Intersight-PowerShell on this provided link. Okay, so now it's demo time. Let's dive in. Let me share my screen and okay. Please confirm if my screen is visible.
Yes, sir. All good on my end.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so the first thing what we want is if you go to intersight.com, and if you don't have an account created, you can click on create an account and follow the rest of the steps. So once you have in your account, you can sign in with your ID. In my case, I'm already signed in, so I'm going to use this. I'm already logged into Intersight. So the first step is you want to generate Intersight API keys. And for that, you click on this drop-down, the service selected drop-down, and you go to the settings tab. So if you click on settings, on the left, you want to click on settings again. And if you scroll down at the center pane, you have API keys in here. So if you click on this API keys, on the right side, you will have generate API key option. So if I click on this generate API key, it prompts me for a description. So I can just give it as demo, and I can choose the schema. For now, we'll just choose schema version 2. And if I click on generate, it gives me two values in here, an API key ID and a secret key. All I need is I want to save these two keys on my end so I can use these in my scripts. So, and one more important point is if you forget to save the secret key now, so if I close this and if I go back, see, I can get the API key ID, but I don't have a way to get the secret key. So all I need is if I can just delete this and regenerate the API key and just use those in my scripts, right? And it's another good habit would be if you want to ensure that your keys are secure and are not exposed to anyone else, you can just rotate your keys every 6 months or whatever time frame you guys feel is necessary to keep them secure. So once you have your API keys, I've already generated the API keys and I've saved it on my end. So we'll be using those keys. Now the next is, suppose, how do you get started with the APIs, right? How do you know what API path to use, what data to send? So in this case, I'll take an example of policies. So suppose I want to create an NTP policy and I want to find out what to do, how to find the path for NTP, how to create the data, the data portion of it so that I can create an NTP policy. The first step is I can use the browser developer tool. So all I need is I can just right click and click on inspect. And then under this inspect, you have this network tab. So if I click on this network tab, it will show me all the requests which are being made and the responses which we are receiving. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to click on create a policy, and I'm going to choose NTP policy in here. And I can just choose NTP, click on start. I have to specify an organization. I'll give it a name as demo. I'll give description as demo. I click on next. And let me just expand this a bit. That way we can clearly see it. I'm just going to enter the time zone. I'll just choose America's Los Angeles. Now, before I click on create, what I can do is I can clear this window, and now I can click on create. So what it does is, now I saw that there was a post request which was sent in the background. And if I click on this, this shows me the post request was sent to NTP/policy. So now I know, okay, this is the path which I have to go to, right, to create the NTP policy. Now, the second thing is, if I look at the payload section, and if I look at the view source, this gives me the JSON object which I'm sending, or which the GUI is sending to create this NTP policy. So now if I, let me just open a new window here. And if I format this, now you can see here, this is the post body which is being sent. So this kind of gives you what it is sending in the background, and you can use this to like create your own scripts and use this logic to send the data and create the NTP policy. Now we'll hold on to this one for now. Now, so this is one way to explore it, right? Like, for example, now if I want to find out what API calls are being made in the background to list all the policies, I can just click on policies, and now you can see here it is making a call to this search/search items, and after that it is passing a lot of filter options, and you can use this to explore like what it is returning and how it is returning, right? You can explore this request, you can look at the payload, the preview, the response which you're getting, and all that stuff. Now, another important thing to note from here is, if I look at this response headers, Intersight sends a X Starship trace ID response header with every request. So this is kind of important. So if you see that, if you feel that your API calls are failing and you want Cisco to investigate those calls, you want to take a note of this Starship trace ID for the failed request and share it with Cisco. So that way we can look at those logs and give an analysis to you. So this is one way to explore the Intersight API and learn what Intersight GUI is doing in the background. The second is we do have a built-in REST API client. So for that, what you can do is you can click on this question mark. You can go to this help center. If you do that, at the bottom, we have API documentation. So if you click on this, it takes you to the API documentation. The other approach is if you just go to intersight.com/API docs/API reference, it will straight away take you to that page as well. Now, under this tab, we do have a REST API client, which is built into the browser. On the left, you have an option to search. So for example, in this case, if I want to search the NTP policy, I can just search for NTP and it gives me the NTP policy in here. And now I have various options like post to create the policy. If I want to read the existing policy, so I can just click on this and I can send the data, right? So if I just click on send, it gives me all the NTP policies which are created. So in my case, there was only one NTP policy which we created, which was called demo, right? And now I can apply some query filters as well. Suppose I just want to get so this data is pretty big, right? Like it has like 43 lines. What if I don't want the whole thing? I just want the name and the NTP service. So all I can do is I can take a note of this and I can specify name and the NTP service. And now if I do a send, you can see here the response got reduced to just 14 lines with showing the name and the NTP server value, right? The class ID, MOID, and the object type will be returned with every response, so you can't remove these. By default, they will be there. The only thing what you can do is just manipulate the other things, other information which you're getting back. So this is, you can use the query parameters to filter those outputs. So this is another approach to interact with the Intersight environment. And this is like creating or interacting with the Intersight platform live, right? So now, as an example, we have a demo NTP policy. Now I'm going to create a new policy using the data which we captured in the browser inspect. So in this case, I'm going to name it as demo 1, And I'll change this value to 2.2.2, and I'll just keep the rest of the stuff as same. So if I just copy and paste this under this post, right? And if I click on send, it creates that NTP policy. And if I go back to Intersight and look at policies, you can see here the demo 1 policy got created. And if I look at this, it has that NTP service 2.2.2 and the name as demo_1. So this is how you can use the Intersight built-in REST API client to interact with the Intersight APIs and play around and learn from it. Okay, now we have, or I have created, or like we have created a demo repository where we are where we have posted some sample code which we'll be using for today's demo. So I'm going to share this in the chat for everyone. If you want to just take a look at the code which we will be using today. Now, let me open up my Visual Studio Code and go to the code now. Okay, so we'll be looking at the following demos. We have already looked at the Intersight API key generation, browser inspect, and the REST API client. Now we'll be looking at Postman. So for Postman, we do have the Postman collection. I've kind of provided the link here. So if you go to this Postman collection, this is where you can go and click on this code and download zip. I've already downloaded the file. On my side, it is available under this folder. So if I open this, you can see here these two Postman collection and the environment JSON files. So if I open my Postman, all you have to do is click on import and upload those files. I've already done that. So it kind of, this is the collection what we are looking at. And then under the environment variables, under the Intersight environment variables, I have already updated the API key and secret key values. And that's all I did, right? And now if I go back to collection and if I go and make an API call, I can see here that I'm getting a response back. And all I have to do is click on right click, duplicate, and suppose I want to get organization, right? So I can just do this organization. And if I make a call, I can see here I'm getting the responses back for organization, right? If I want to add some filters, again, I can apply this filter, which select name. So I just want the name of the organization. And if I click on send, it will give me the name like the default organization, the production lab, BGL lab. So it's giving me all those responses back, right? This is how you can kind of use Postman to make API calls to Intersight. Now, another important thing to note here is for this collection, if you click on this collection name and there is a pre-request script section, this is where the Intersight authentication related stuff is happening. So this was created by Cisco, and this is where the HTTP header signing and all that stuff happen, all that logic happens. Now, if you want to create your own collection, what you can do is you can click on new, click on, actually, I want to create a collection. So I'll just say blank collection, and I'll give it a name as demo. And all I need is that pre-request script. So I'll go back to this. I'll just copy this pre-request script, go to this demo section, paste it, and save this, right? Now, all I have to do is click on add request. I can say get or get NTP. Under this get, I can call the NTP policy. And I think over here, I just have to update this with intersight.com and save it. And again, in the environment variables, I'm using the same Intersight environment variable where I have my API keys defined. So if I make a request, you can see here, I'm getting the response back. So the only thing what you need is this pre-request script, which will take care of the rest of the adding the headers and all that stuff. This is written in JavaScript. So if you're familiar with JavaScript, you can look at this and you can explore what it does in the background. Now, this is how you can use Postman to make API calls and learn from it. Okay, now the next section or the next demo is for Ansible. In this case, I have created a file with my API private key, which is stored at this location, and the API key ID, which is this one here. And I've created a ntp.yaml file. So if we go through this, in the first section, I'm defining the variables, which are pretty standard for most of the Ansible playbooks. In this section, I'm getting the organization-related information because the policies will be created under an organization. So we want that organization MOID, which we can use to create the NTP policy. Now, in this case, I'm getting the organization information. I'm printing that information, the MOID value, and then I'm using this Intersight REST API a module to create the NTP policy. And again, we are using the API body, which is similar to what we identified in the browser inspect, right? And at the bottom, I'm kind of printing this NTP policy, which got created. So let's explore this. Now, if I go to my, please let me know if this is visible enough. I hope this is.
Looks good.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So the first thing is you want to identify what version of Ansible you're running. In this case, I'm running 2.8.10.8. The next is you want to install the Galaxy collection for Intersight, so which is Cisco.Intersight. If I run this, if in my case it is already installed, so that's why it says it's already installed. But in your case, if you don't have it installed, it will install it. And then the next step is you can identify where the collection got installed. So if I run this command, Intersight Ansible Galaxy collection list, it will show me that, okay, it is installed under this location. So if I look at this location, you can see here it's under Cisco Intersight, and this is where you can find all the playbooks, sample playbooks, which we have provided roles and all those things. So let's take a look at few playbooks. If I click on this, this is where you can find some sample playbooks which you can use to play around with Intersight API. In my case, I've created a custom playbook, which is ntp.yaml, and I've an inventory file defined as well. So I'm going to use that. Let's clear this out, and let's try this playbook now. If I run this, the first thing what it is doing is, let's take a look at this now. So the first thing what it does is it is getting the organization information, and it is printing the organization MOID. Then it is creating the NTP policy and then printing the NTP policy which got created. And in the response, we can see here, it created the NTP policy. And let's take a look at the GUI now. So if I go back to Intersight, and if I go to policies, you can see here the Ansible demo policy got created. And if we click on this, it has the values like 8.8.8, 8844, which were defined in my playbook, right? So this is how you can kind of use Ansible to make API calls with Intersight. Now let's take a look at the next demo. The next is Python SDK and request library. For this, I have created two scripts. One is using the request library and the other one is using the SDK. Let's look at the SDK first. So over here, what we have is we have defined a couple of functions. The first is the get API client function. This is if you go to the Python SDK repository, this is where you can get this function. I kind of copied this function from there and I'm using it in my script. So this is essentially taking care of the HTTP request signing using the API keys, so essentially the authorization piece, right? The next is I'm getting the organization. Again, I'm making API calls to get the organization information because I want to use that to create the NTP policy. The next is get the organization relationship. Again, we'll be using this in the API call to create the NTP policy. And finally, in this section, I'm kind of reading the API keys and creating an API client, which I'll be using to create the policy. Over here, getting the organization info, and then finally defining my NTP policy information, like what NTP servers I want and all that stuff. So suppose I want to change this to 7, just to make sure it is separate. So now, if I go to my Python piece, and let's look at this. If I do this, I have a SDK ntp.py policy, which we were looking at, our script, which we were looking at, right? So now all I have to do is, if I run this, it creates the NTP policy, and the name is PySDK demo, and it returns what it created, right? And if I go back to Intersight, and if I look at my policies, it created this PySDK demo policy. And if I look at the values, you can see here 8877. That's what we defined in our script. The next is the request library. So in this case, let me just reduce the size a bit. In this case, again, I'm using the Intersight auth helper library, which has a function called Intersight auth, which is used to sign my HTTP request being sent to Intersight. I'm getting the organization information in here. I'm creating the NTP policy in this section, in this function. And then finally, I'm kind of reading the API keys, creating the auth object, which I'll be using to make API calls to Intersight to get the organization, and then finally to create the NTP policy. Now, if I run this script, request library script, again, it's going to make an API call. It's going to, the response what we got was 200. And then this is what the object it created with the values as PyRequest demo, and the NTP server says all 8s and 8844. And if I go back to Intersight, and if I look at the policies, you can see here the PyRequest demo policy got created with the desired information what we had in the configuration. So this is how you can use Python SDK or the request library to interact with the Intersight API. The next is PowerShell. So let's take a look at PowerShell now. I'm going to minimize this. With PowerShell, again, you need PowerShell 7.3 or higher. You want to install the Intersight module using this command, install module name intersight.powershell. Once you have this installed, you have for Intersight available on your laptop, right? And then the first step, what we need is we want to configure the Intersight environment, right? With the API key, the URL where we'll be connecting to the secret key and all that stuff. And the set Intersight configuration parameter is all you need with these parameters to configure your environment. Once you have this, you can start making API calls. So in this case, I'm making the get Intersight organization name default and then creating the NTP policy. Now, if I go to my PowerShell environment, I have this NTP policy. So if I do this, if I just copy and paste this, right? Now my environment is configured to interact with Intersight and get some live responses back. So now I can do get Intersight NTP policy and run this, and it is going to give me a live response. If I want to do some other logic, I can do that as well. Like, or I can just straight away run my script now. I don't even have to do that. So right now, we ran the script directly, which has all the code in it, and it created the NTP policy PWSH demo. And if I go back to policies, you can see here PWSH demo policy got created a few seconds ago. And if we go inside, you can see here it has the NTP servers 159 and 23. And if I look back at my configuration, let's look at this. So the configuration had 159 and 23. Pretty straightforward. All you need is this section in here, and you Intersight.com /API reference /downloads, and this is where you can find the link to the PowerShell SDK, or where you can find this information. And I'll show you where you can find that. So let's move on to the next demo, which is the last demo, which is Terraform. Now, in this case, what you need is the Terraform block where you will be defining, okay, I'll be using the Cisco DevNet Intersight provider, what version of provider I'm using. And then under the provider block, I'm defining my API key, the secret key, and the endpoint URL. So if you have your virtual appliance on your side, you can specify the FQDN for that appliance, right? And then I'm just using this data source to get the information for the organization. That way I can use that in my Intersight policy resource. And then I'm just outputting the object which got created on Intersight. So now if I run this, let's take a look at this. I have this ntp.terraform. So if I run this Terraform init, it's going to first download the Intersight provider, which is 10.42. Now it is installing that provider. Once it is installed, we can run the Terraform plan and apply commands. Now, if I do Terraform plan, you will see some directories or some files getting created here on the left. And now, if you look at this output, it says it's going to create object. And in this case, it is going to create this NTP policy, and it is going to return this data. Now, all the outputs are not completed because it has not been applied yet. So once we apply it, and once the object gets created, it is going to fill in all these details for us. So let's go ahead and do Terraform apply. If I do this, it's going to create the NTP policy. It's going to prompt me. So I'll just say yes. And then it prints the output that, okay, it created this NTP policy, which is, the name is TF_NTP. So if I go back to Intersight, and if I look at policies, the TF_NTP policy got created a few seconds back, and it has all the desired configuration what we want, like 1.1.1.1, 2.2.2.2. And then it has a tag called DC lab. And now if I look back at my Terraform configuration, the tag is DC lab. So it is defined here. To find all these links, you can again go to intersight.com/API docs/API reference. And under this section, you have a downloads tab as well. This is where you can find links for the Python SDK, the modules for Ansible, the Terraform, and the Intersight piece. So if you click on this, Terraform, it will take you to the Terraform registry where the documentation for the Terraform provider is. If you look at this documentation, this is where you can find all that information. Similarly, for PowerShell, you can click on this DevNet PowerShell on GitHub, and this is where you can find some sample code as well. And similarly, you can explore the other links which are available here. And then we do have a code repo link available under intersight.com where you can find some sample code which is created by other people, and you can learn from that as well. Okay, I think we are done with this demo, so I'll just go back to the slide. Okay, now key points to remember from today's presentation: the Intersight API uses the REST architecture to provide access to the Intersight management information model. It uses the API keys with HTTP signature for authorization. The response is always going to be in the JSON format. And then if you want to investigate why your API calls are failing, in the response header, you can look out for X*ship trace ID, which is created by Intersight, and you can share that with TAG for troubleshooting purpose. Now it's time for Q&A. So,
yeah, let's go ahead and get to our Q&A. Raj and Sandeep, really appreciate y'all bringing us this info today. Great session so far. Going to take a time to answer some questions. Just as a reminder to all of our attendees, if you do have a question for our presenters today, please use the Q&A panel here on WebEx. It allows us to filter some questions a little bit better. First and foremost, want to get to a question here from Stephen. Can you modify existing objects, i.e. WWPNS and MAC pools via API, adjust addressing?
sorry, what was the? I'm not
place it
sure if I
here.
understood the question. So if
Yeah,
you,
no worries. I'll place it here in the chat for you, Sandeep, if you want to read it just from your end as well.
Sure. Can you modify existing objects, that is WPNs and MAC pools via API, adjusting addressing? So you can pretty much do everything what you can in the GUI through the API call. So like whatever operations you can do in the GUI, the same will be applicable in the API as well. So if the GUI gives you an option to modify the existing objects, you can do it through API. I hope that kind of clarifies your question.
Yeah, perfect. This one, if you do have an answer on it, if not, no worries, just came in. Another one from a different Steven. Does Cisco update Intersight as needed quarterly? Is there a channel log for any new releases, etc.?
Yeah, so we do have, if you go to intersight.com, and let me see if I can share my screen. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, no worries.
So if we go to intersight.com/help, if you just go to this URL, intersight/help, by default, it takes you to the SaaS help page. And if you have a virtual appliance, you can just click on this link on the top right, and that will take you to the Appliance Help Center. But the point is, if you go to this What's New section, this is where you can find what has been updated on the Intersight platform and on what date, right? They give you all the information around what they have added. So for example, the alarm suppression capability was added in the platform on November 30th, right? Similarly, you can look at some previous instances when those changes were done. So it depends on what functionality like they're adding and when it is ready, and only then like you can just look at this Watch News section. Hopefully that will give you the updated information with regards to what is being updated. And then we do have some caveat section where you can find the open and resolved caveats. Yeah, I think
Perfect.
this is where you can come and check.
Perfect. And keep in mind for all our attendees, a lot of the links and resources that we have talked about on today's session will be in that post-webinar discussion thread on the Cisco Learning Network. I'll place a link here in the chat screen once again momentarily. That way y'all can have access to that as well. Couple more questions here coming through. Let's organize.
Yeah, I think let me take those questions, Tanner. So I see there is one which is requested by David. Says that can an on-prem instance of Intersight be deployed as a dev environment? Currently looking at DevNet and the sandbox wouldn't be available until February. So for the on-prem appliance, you need licenses. What you can do is you can go to intersight.com and use the SaaS platform. You can create your own account and just use that to play around with regards to explore the interface and try to make API calls or create policies and use those workflows in your production environment. So you can use the SaaS platform. It comes with 90 days trial, plus it has a free tier if you have like M6 or below generation service with some basic functionality. So you can use the SaaS platform for that.
Perfect. We'll check that one off. All righty. How can you access logs from troubleshooting? Is there a verbose mode to see more info than on the GUI?
What kind of logs are you? So in terms of troubleshooting, right? It depends on what you're trying to troubleshoot. If you're running into issues with your API calls, the best thing would be to get the trace ID and open a tag case and get the tag team investigate that, because you don't have access to the backend Intersight logs. The other thing is, if you feel that there's something wrong with the SDKs themselves, then you can go to the GitHub repos where the SDK is hosted and post your issues to the GitHub portal. So under GitHub, you have an issues section. That's where you can report your problems with the SDK and get those addressed through that channel.
Perfect. Let's get. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I see one more question. Yeah, I'll take one more question. So I see there is one from Scott Harrison, and it says that any pointers on using XLS for input. So I think you can straight away, it depends on your, for example, if you're using Python, then you can use Python to read the XLS and somehow use that to input in your scripts which you have created, right? So it depends on which platform you're using. You need to you can write anything with regards to how to read the XLS and use those inputs to pass on the information in your scripts to create objects in Intersight. Now, if you're looking for some existing examples, I have to double check. I think there was one around importing UCSM VLANs in Intersight, right? That could be one example where you are exporting the Excel from UCS Manager and then using that Excel as input to create VLANs in Intersight. So we can share those examples if that's something, if that kind of gives you some pointers towards how you can use XLS as input.
Here's another question for you, Sandeep, from Pranav. This might be kind of off that troubleshooting section. Do we have a TAC team at the moment for any API issues?
So if you're having issues with your scripts, that's something which TAC will not help, right? TAC can help you if there is something wrong with the platform, right? So if you feel that like Intersight is supposed to do XYZ things and it is not doing it that way, then you can open a TAC case and have them investigate by giving the X Starship trace ID with regards to why that call failed, and they can investigate that. But if you're looking to investigate why there's something wrong with the PowerShell SDK or with any other SDK, then you have to reach out to the DevNet community. Like under the GitHub, you can report issues and get those issues fixed through those channels. So in those situations, TAC may not be the right team for that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Just want to get to just a couple more questions here before we do wrap up. What if I need to get started? What do I need to get started with Cisco Intersight REST API?
So with Intersight APIs, you just need you need an Intersight account. You need the Intersight API keys. And then finally, you need a developer tool using which you can like make API calls. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Perfect. At this moment, it looks like that has covered all of our questions. Sandeep, I'll start with you. Is there anything else that you wanted to cover before we do wrap up today?
I'll just give one. So I see a response from Scott around the Python. So let me just give him an example for importing Excel. I have a PowerShell script using which you can import the Excel, and you can just, or it's a CSV essentially, not Excel exactly, but I'll just post the link for that as an example. How do I have to?
You just click on his question. Yep.
Okay. Hopefully, if you look at that script, what it does is essentially it imports or it uses the CSV file which we exported from UCS Manager, and then using those as input parameters to create VLANs within Intersight. So probably you can use that to like play around, and I think Brian also shared a link. You can probably use that as well for Python. So just use that and learn from that one.
All right.
I think we got that covered. Any other pending questions, Tanner?
No other pending questions. Just a thank you from Scott. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate everything that you and Raj have brought to us today. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we do wrap up here?
No, I think so I think we are all set. So let's move on. I'll just move the slide. So, okay, now for your next steps, please keep an eye out for a survey from us. It will be from Cisco Customer Experience, and it's quick and easy. And we really appreciate it if you can take 2 minutes to kind of help provide feedback to improve our future offerings. And with that, this concludes our session. Thank you so much for all the attendees for joining and spending some time for Intersight API. And thank you for all the panelists. Have a great day.